Unfortunately, the competencies for this course really don't delve into the design of software as much as it does programming of software, but it's a very integral part of developing software. You really want your end user to use your software effectively and efficiently, and you want to make it as intuitive and as comfortable for them to use as possible. So for years we've talked about user interface, and you may have also heard the term GUI or GUI, which is graphical user interface, which is typically how user interfaces are presented in today's marketplace. In more recent years, developers have been talking about user experience. It's a little bit different because user interface often delves into things like colors and which font should I use and how should I lay things out, and the look and feel of the interface. The user experience focuses on how does the user best use your product. We want it to be intuitive. We want it to accomplish the things that they want or need. That's all part of the user experience. If we did a search in Amazon, you would find there's a lot of different books out there on both user experience and user interface design. I had the privilege this summer of sitting in on a workshop with David Platt, and he's got a book coming out called The Joy of UX. I'm not sure when this will be published, but it should be very soon. And I would encourage you, if you're interested in this stuff and you really want to be a developer, I would suggest you invest in this book or something similar and learn more of the principles. I thought he had a lot of great insights at this workshop this summer. Another designer I follow is Joe Natoli. He has a new book just coming out on UX design called Think First. I'm in the process of reading it now. And as the title implies, this book is about the thought processes that one must go through to develop a good product that both meets the business needs of your client and gives the user what they expect. As Mr. Natoli states, this book is about, quote, strategic concerns, not tactical ones. The text walks you through key stages and important questions that you need to ask and answer as you address what's important, what's feasible, and what's critical for viability. It is essential that we understand what we are creating and what the value is to the user. We need to focus on people and not the product. And as developers, we need to put ourselves in their place. His website is largely a blog, so as you go through it, you're going to find lots of great tips on user interface and user experience. But there's also a free book here. There's a little ebook on the 10 Commandments of UI Design. If you sign up for his monthly newsletter, you'll get that book as a free download. Back in 2002, I created a computer-based training module on GUI design guidelines for my CS159 class. And at that time, that was a VB6 class, so things have changed considerably. And I did my master's thesis on design principles for presentations, and I applied a lot of the stuff that I used in desktop publishing courses to designing for software as well. This really is about user interface design, but it also covers some user experience things as well. Now, the approach that we take today with mobile apps and so forth has changed a lot, and so these principles are still generally hold true, but there's a lot more to consider today. But I want to get you started thinking in terms of design, so let me walk you through this presentation. The interface is simply the part of the application that the user interacts with, or what they see. And in terms of like mobile design today, one of the critical issues is we don't want to put really small buttons on a screen that are close together that someone may have difficulty touching with their fingertips. So we have to design a little bit differently today our interfaces for mobile apps versus maybe desktop apps where with using a mouse we can be much more precise in terms of our pointing. Now back in 2001 when I created this, most of us were still using VCRs, and probably a lot of you don't even have a VCR anymore, or if you do, it's not what you can really use to watch movies. You're either streaming, maybe using a Blu-ray player. But if we think about how VCRs change in terms of their interface in just 20 years, it's pretty remarkable. They became much smaller, but if you look at the interface there, the one in 1981, it had push-button controls that were similar to what you might find on a car radio preset. Notice there was no digital readout in 1981 that showed the time in terms of where you were at in playing. And if you look at the one at the bottom, 2001, we replaced those now with a jog and shuttle over on the right-hand side. That dial made it much more precise to go rewind and fast forward and much faster. For the digital readout, we have jacks on the front for headphones that were not there on the older models. Now today, at least on my Blu-ray player, there are very few buttons. Everything is done with the remote. Nobody today gets up and pushes buttons on a TV or a player. We all use remotes today. And so now we have interfaces that are designed in the remote rather than the machine itself. One of the critical things we need to think about in terms of developing software is who is our target user. We need to think on their terms and ask some questions about who they are and what the skills they have and what their expectations are and what features do we need to put into this to satisfy them and capture a market. I mentioned David Platt's workshop this summer, and the key point he made in that workshop was you as a designer are not the end user. In designing, I typically start with storyboards. Paper and pencil, sketching out the screen, what would look like, different screens, and this can be used to not only identify the key components and what those components should be named, and then also include some information in terms of what the different buttons do and so forth that I can hand off to a programmer. It could also be used in gathering feedback from my client long before I ever commit to putting things in the computer. Okay, so let me talk about my top 10 design principles as they were back in 2002. Number 10, fuchsia and lime green are not complementary. Use colors that go together and make it easy to read. In the bad example at the top, the orange text on the magenta background is almost impossible to read, as is the dark text on the button against a dark purple background. One typically use lighter and darker colors together, and research has shown that dark text on a light background is the easiest to read. Also bear in mind, a lot of people are colorblind, and what looks good to you is often subjective. You always want to field test your applications and get feedback from potential end users on your interface. Number 9, just because you have 87 fonts doesn't mean you need to use them. The general rule of thumb is limit your fonts to 2. And you can, within each font family though, use different styles such as bold and italics and bold italic or black. But try to limit your fonts to 2. That holds true in desktop publishing as well as software design. Number 8, thou shalt not shout or underline. Research shows that text written in all uppercase is much harder to read than text that is in lowercase. The reason being that almost every letter in uppercase basically has the same shape. It's a block. In lowercase, you have letters that extend below the baseline and letters that extend above the ascender line. Visually, we can actually read much faster when it's not in all uppercase. In email, we tend to consider when somebody puts things in all uppercase that they are shouting. Also, avoid underlining. Underlining was used in old typewriter days to indicate something was to be set in italics. But today, underlining means something very different. It's associated with being a link, a URL that one would click. So don't use underlining for emphasis. Instead, I'd use bold. Kiss the mice. We're probably familiar with the KISS acronym of Keep It Simple, Stupid. And mice is make it clear and easy. Now, I have 2 versions of color pickers here. One, the user has to enter information. And as they enter values between 0 and 255, we can get different colors here. But there's nothing that indicates what those ranges are, 0 to 255. In the example below here, we can use sliders to change our colors. We also see numbers here in terms of the RGB colors as an integer and as a hexadecimal value. But I may not understand, or the user may not understand, what HFF0096 is. They don't understand that the hexadecimal value. Here we're identifying it. So make it clear what things are. Now I also have instructions here, and I will say that in terms of mobile apps, we want to do as little text as possible, as little clutter as possible. So today, I would probably put instructions as a pop-up available maybe through a button with a little eye on it for information. Back in 2002, I had a lot of users that weren't computer literate or weren't used to standards in terms of design, that we had to make things a little clearer to them and provide adequate documentation for them. Don't change a company's identity. Never mess with their logo. Don't change the branding colors. Now, for many years I've worked for Arizona State University, and as you may know as a student here in the area, ASU has two colors, maroon and gold. That's their team colors. That's the school colors. But it's not any maroon, it's not any gold. We have 16.7 million different shades of color available to us in a 24-bit color system on today's computers. And I can create a lot of different shades of maroon and a lot of different shades of gold. But if I'm doing work for ASU, they're going to give me a prescriptive number using that hexadecimal value in terms of this is the maroon you can use and this is the gold you can use. Do not stray from that. Almost every large corporation has guidelines on their identity in terms of how you can use their logo and what colors you need to use. Be aware of that as you work with the client. They also have information in terms of what fonts you can use. Number 5, chaos theory does not apply here. In the top example, I have a series of radio buttons and checkboxes for changing text. I can make text bold, I can make it larger, I can even change the font. But they're scattered around. There's no organization to these checkboxes and radio buttons. In the bottom example here, all the fonts are grouped together, the sizes are grouped together, and the styles are grouped together. Number 4, put your schizophrenic tendencies aside. We always want to be consistent in our design. Top example, we have buttons that are multiple sizes, multiple shapes. I have text fields that are different size, different fonts, different styles, different colors. Keep things consistent. Try to align controls. So my text fields here are all aligned on the left. The labels that identify each of those are aligned on the right. My buttons are the same size. Number 3, be familiar. Use metaphors. Think about what your user is used to seeing in a particular industry. Use what applies to that industry. In this top example, for a restaurant, the user can order, say, 2 cheeseburgers and 3 soft drinks, get their subtotal on those 2 items, the overall subtotal, the tax, and the total. But down here on the bottom one, which is a much better example, they can order the same thing. Now, why is this important? It's a metaphor that they're used to seeing. But think about in terms of looking at my bill here. I've got to search through these 6 items, figure out which ones are not 0 and verify that's what I ordered. I have numbers over here to verify the amount. Here it's much easier to see what the items are that were ordered. Number 2, pack light. In desktop publishing, we talked about white space. And white space needs to be used as a design element. Use ample margins. Don't make things look too cluttered. Now, both these examples are cluttered in terms of what we may do today for mobile apps, but the top one much more so. There's very little margin here. In fact, buttons kind of rub up against the frame. Leave some space. Leave space between the buttons. Leave space between the controls here, the images. Number 1, usefully use the user. Design with the user in mind. Think about what the user can and can't do, or what they need or don't need. What are their wants? Now think about this top example. We're asking a user to identify the word for this animal. This is basically teaching young children how to read. So they want them to identify the cat. Well, the problem with that is if they're having a hard time identifying the word cat or spelling the word cat, they probably don't know the word correctly, or animal, or spells. And so your end user, being a child, is not going to understand the instructions. Instead, put a button here with a speaker on it that makes it audio.
Click on the word that matches the animal you see pictured here.
I also made these much larger for a small child to click on, and brighter and larger engages them more.
Very good. You correctly clicked the word cat, spelled C-A-T.
So when they click on it, they're also getting audio feedback, but up here, they're going to get a message box saying, "Excellent, you're absolutely correct." And again, they're probably not going to understand anything that is said there. Okay, so let's talk about some more principles. Limit the use of buttons. I want the user to click on the state they live in, so I've given them 10 buttons. Even worse if we're allowing them to all 50 states. They'd have to hunt for their state, and in this case, they're not listed alphabetically. Another bad design here. So limit your buttons to, I'd say, to 6 if at all possible. A better choice here would be to use a combo box. And we could list all the states and have them listed alphabetically, be easy to find. Gives you much more real estate space in terms of your design, makes it less cluttered. Now this is one that probably no longer holds true in terms of how we design for mobile apps. It used to be that you really wanted your buttons on the bottom. So some of these principles are meant to be violated, or they can all be violated at one point or another, but have a good reason for doing so. The thing I will say here is be consistent. If you're going to multiple screens in an application, don't put your buttons at the top on one screen, the bottom on another screen, on the left on another screen, and on the right on the fourth screen. Be consistent. And provide order. If the default is going to be the OK button rather than the cancel button, put the OK button on the left. We typically read from left to right. Make the left your first choice. Label buttons meaningfully. So here we're asking students to log in. We give them a yes and a no button. What do those things mean? What am I saying yes to, or what am I saying no to? I don't know. Here, same design, but our buttons are login or cancel. Those make much more sense. One thing to note is when you have 3 ellipses after a menu item or a button, that has a standard meaning in operating systems. Whether it's Windows or Mac or Linux, those 3 buttons mean it's going to bring up a dialog box. So as you're designing, keep that in mind. If an action is going to bring up a dialog box, identify it with 3 periods or 3 ellipses. Icons should be meaningful. So I have here a little calculator. I can subtract 25 from 75, or I could add those two together, or multiply or divide. Exact same application up here on my bad example, but I used icons here that I associated with plus, minus, multiply, and divide. So Andy Cat being an A was add, Snoopy being S was subtract, Mickey Mouse was multiplication, and Donald Duck was divide. Pretty stupid. Nobody would understand that. You can also use tooltips in Visual Studio and C# so that when a user points to a button, it brings up a little identification of what that button does, or in the case of a field, what information you're looking for them to enter. Now the one thing about tooltips, these are great for desktop, but for mobile apps, we don't have pointing on mobile apps, or at least most mobile devices. It simply is a touch. If you want the user to respond before doing a particular action, gray out that action. So here I want the user to choose a make, model, and color of the car and then click continue, but I don't force them to do that. So if I click continue here, I get a dialog box that says, "Thank you, you may pick up the select a make manufacturer between 10 a.m. and 2 p.m. tomorrow." Absolutely meaningless. On the bottom example, I have to choose a make, a model, and a color. And then my buttons are no longer grayed out, they become available. I can click continue, and now my dialog box says, "Thank you, you may pick up the red Ford Mustang between 10 a.m. and 2 p.m. tomorrow." We typically use text boxes to gather input from the user, and it's possible though to set up a text box without a border, making it look more like a label. In the bad example here, it's not really evident that you want the user to click on these numbers and change them. It's much more evident here with the borders of the text box that these are fields, and by having your cursor flashing in them, that even makes it clearer. But we can have the user change the number, click the add button, and have those two values added together. Typically when we label text boxes, we want the labels to be to the left of the text box. I like to align my text boxes on the left and align the labels have them right aligned to the left of those text boxes. Sometimes you do have to do labels above the fields based on your layout and your real estate space available to you, but this is really the ideal, label to the left. And make those labels clear. So last name, first name, social security number. So that pretty much indicates what these should contain, and in this case we're showing them an example of what that might look like. Use sentence capitalization as much as possible, except for maybe titles. So here, Cougar Country Inns is capitalized, but make a reservation. Each word should not be capitalized. Use sentence capitalization there, first letter capitalized. Same with the labels. Here, choose a state. C, A, and S are all capitalized. Should be choose a state with just the C capitalized. I would also suggest on your labels, put a colon at the end of the label. Same thing on the buttons. Make reservation, lowercase r, bad example, uppercase R. In doing labels, you don't need to say what type of item the label points to, such as first name text box, last name text box. Just say first name, last name. Cut out the unnecessary words. When you have a list that you're presenting, if you number that list, it implies a sequential order. So the implication here on the bad example as far as spring semester classes is that the student would take these classes in that order. They're numbered 1 through 9. It'd be better to use bullets or nothing, just list. Usually your user will pick up pretty quickly that these are organized alphabetically. The numbers tend to hide that fact. When you have lists, I suggest left aligning them, not centering them. We want to organize our controls that go together. In the bad example here, we have a bunch of radio buttons and checkboxes that allow me to change fonts and font size and maybe style, but they're not grouped together nicely. In this bottom example, I grouped them with group boxes, and so all the fonts are together, the sizes are together, the styles are together. Very similar to what you would see in a font dialog, standard font dialog. Organize things logically, chronologically, or based on frequency. In this top example for a restaurant, I have the days listed: Friday, Monday, Saturday, Sunday, Tuesday, Thursday, Wednesday. No logical order there. The user is going to expect this to be Sunday through Saturday days of the week. Here's a big one that I see students err on, and that is the difference between radio buttons and checkboxes. Radio buttons are mutually exclusive. When we choose one, it should unchoose another one in that group, whatever was selected before. Checkboxes, however, are used to make multiple selections, or can be used that way. So I've actually reversed these two in the bad and good example. So in the bad example, I have checkboxes that are mutually exclusive through my programming. I can only choose one. Same here with the side. If I click on sweet corn, it's going to uncheck the grilled vegetable. But then for the toppings, I'm allowed to choose multiples. And it should be the reverse of that. So the good example, the mutually exclusive items, where I can only choose one, are radio buttons. And where I can choose multiple things are checkboxes. By the way, when you put radio buttons in a group box, they are mutually exclusive to each other. separate from these being mutually exclusive. So Visual Studio will take care of that whether you're using VB or C#. If you put them in a group panel or group box, they will be mutually exclusive by default. But changing the item in the entree does not change the item in the side, and vice versa. I would suggest limiting your radio buttons. I think 6 is a good number. In this example, there's about a dozen here. It's really too many. It'd be better to put those in a list box where I can scroll through the items when I want to present a whole bunch. Same with checkboxes. I'd limit those to about 10. On the surface, these two projects look identical. In the good example, I have a drop-down combo box here where I can choose a destination and see a picture of that. Same thing here, but if we look at the combo box drop-down, there's only 2 items. And I have to click quite a bit to get through all those items. I can't see very much at a time. Not the best as far as usability. Now, that said, there may be times when you want to have a very limited number of items in the combo box if it is critical to be able to see this information while making a choice. That's rare, but be aware that there are times when you might need to do that. For the most part, we usually want 6 to 10 items in a combo box. And by the way, it would be ideal to display those combo box items alphabetically if at all possible, or some type of logical fashion. Provide boundaries for your user. So I'm asking them to enter a number between 1 and 100, but I could actually enter 200 in this text box and click OK, and I'm told I put in an invalid number. I can try again. Here I used a numeric up-down control where the maximum value let me go to is 100, and the lowest number would be 1. I also can't type anything into this box. I have to use those controls. So I can't type in a decimal value. The application is identical here. I've got a process that's going to take a little bit of time. We need to tell our user to be patient, or that something's happening. So I'm going to count to 300,000 in this top bad example, and we'll see it's going to take several seconds, probably almost a minute for this to happen. But at least I'm seeing something happening here. I can see the number increasing, and that helps me to wait. But visually, it still is not the best example. And if I was running a process where maybe if I'm processing some data where nothing is happening on the screen, the user is going to be likely to think the machine is frozen up or the application stopped working and to exit it. So we want to keep them engaged somehow. On this bottom example, I'm going to do the same thing, but I'm going to improve it by showing them a progress bar. Those numbers are flashing by pretty quickly. It's hard for me to maybe comprehend where I'm at in the process. Now I have a visual component that's showing me roughly, percentage-wise, how close I am to being finished. So be consistent in your terminology. Here I have highlight the carnivores, show the primates, and accentuate the rodents. Why not be consistent and say highlight the carnivores, highlight the primate, highlight the rodents? Now I would actually improve this by saying, have a label that says highlight the, maybe with colon, and then have a button that says carnivores, primates, and rodents. No need to have highlight the 3 times. Provide helpful feedback. So here we're asking the user to enter a social security number. So if I put in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and click submit, I'm told I got an error. Try again. On this bottom example though, when I do that, I'm told a social security number consists of 9 digits. You only entered 5 digits. Okay, so that was a little more helpful feedback. Now in this case, I'm going to enter 10 digits. I get the same error message. Down here, I get a similar error message I had before, but now it's telling me I entered 10 digits, so I entered 1 too many. Well, let's change this a little bit. I'm going to make that last digit. I'll do 9 digits, but an A. And again, I get an error, but no feedback on what the problem is. If I do that here, my feedback here is the Social Security number contains only numeric characters. The A character you entered makes the Social Security number invalid. Please correct it and click Submit again. So very useful feedback to our user. So as you're developing your apps, think about some design principles. Make it look nice, make it useful, make it user-friendly.